So let's begin. VCE Economics, Unit 3, Area of Study 1. So as I have already mentioned in the introductory video, Area of Study 1 is concerned about microeconomics. And the first fundamental reason why we study about microeconomics is because of the concept of relative scarcity. If we have, suppose, unlimited amount of resources, we don't need to make any choices. And because we don't need to make any choices, the whole field of microeconomics would not exist, because the whole purpose of learning economics is to understand how people make choices and also how to influence the choice people make because of these limited resources. So a formal definition of relative scarcity is the condition that there are unlimited needs and wants from economic agents. You can also say unlimited needs and wants from people or from consumers, but maybe it's better to use the term economic agents to show you have a more in-depth understanding of the economics. This is what the examiners are looking for when they are marking the exam. If you can provide some fancy terminologies, maybe they will award you with a higher mark, especially in the 7 marks, 8 marks question. The difference between a 7 mark and 8 marks are really small. So it all depends on those small details that you are able to provide to the examiners. Okay, since we have unlimited needs and wants, however, resources. So what do I mean by resources? It's land, labor, capital. So the 3 factors of production are finite. There is not enough resources to satisfy desires. So all those things are just a statement, so it's a fact. So what is the consequence of this fact? Well, the consequence is we must make decisions to resource allocation. That best satisfy society's need. Maybe needs and wants. So this is the consequence of relative scarcity, is that we need to make decisions. And during this decision-making process, we need to come up with a way to somehow evaluate the cost and benefits of our decisions, so we can make an optimal choice. And how do we measure which option is better than the other? Well, we use opportunity cost. So this should be a familiar concept to you. I think it's covered in year 11. It is a very important concept, and sometimes it's quite confusing. So the definition of opportunity cost is the value of the next best alternative foregone when making a decision. Because we have limited resources. And the goal of our decision-making process is to minimize the opportunity cost. So maybe I think an example could be helpful. So suppose you have two choices. So choice A and choice B. And in choice A, you have a consumption basket, 3 apples, 1 banana. Basket B, 4 apples, 0 banana. So if you go from A to B, what you are effectively doing is you are choosing to consume 1 more apple and 1 less banana. So when we go back to the definition of opportunity cost, so what is the best alternative foregone when you go from A to B? Well, you have forego the opportunity of consuming 1 banana. So in this case, the opportunity cost of switching from A to B will be 1 banana. And the direction is important. If you want to go from B to A, you are going from 4 to 3 apples and 0 to 1 banana. So in this case, the opportunity cost will be 1 apple, because relative to B, which is what you are started with, you get 1 less apple. And this is your opportunity cost. In the exam, it is common to have those kind of questions in multiple choice, where students tend to mix them up. So they may say, oh, the opportunity cost of going from A to B is 1 apple. But what is really the case is that you are consuming 1 less banana. So the opportunity cost is 1 banana. Always keep this in mind. So it is what you have forgone that is the opportunity cost. And the goal is to minimize the cost as much as possible. So you are making yourself better off. I can further illustrate this by changing A to 0 banana. And then clearly, I think everybody would choose option B. So everyone would move from option A to option B. Why is this the case? Because you gain 1 apple in your consumption basket, but you don't have any opportunity cost. So going from A to B does not have any opportunity cost, in fact. So it is indeed minimized. And you have 1 extra apple, which increases your satisfaction. And so everyone would choose the consumption basket B in this instance. So I hope this is clear to you. Okay. So relative scarcity and opportunity cost is actually one of the study design dot point in the VCE economics study design. And everything mentioned in the study design is examinable. And I will cover all the study design dot points in my VCE economic videos. Okay, moving on to the next study design point. A very important concept as well is called perfectly competitive market. PCM. So in the exam, I tend to use PCM because this is very tedious to write out. So what is a perfectly competitive market? Well, so the first characteristic, you need to know this very well because in the exam, sometimes they ask you to provide the definition of perfectly competitive market. And even if they don't ask you to provide a definition, when the question involved is 4 marks, 5 marks, you need to also provide the definition in order to gain full credit. So the first characteristic is large number of buyers and sellers. So we need to know what is the consequence of having a large numbers of buyers and sellers. Okay, so the consequence is that no one has market power. Firms are price takers. So that's the two consequences of these characteristics. So what do I mean by market power? Market power is usually to do with sellers, sometimes also to do with buyers. You may heard of the term monopoly. So monopoly is a case of a very high, very strong market power. So there is only one seller in the market. A famous case in Australia, I guess, is the Australian Post. The Australian Post is the monopoly of postal services as given by the law. So because there's only one seller in this market, they can basically charge whatever they want to customers. And you do not have any other options. So usually what is happening in a unregulated market, when a firm have market power, they charge a very large premium. And in this case, the consumers will pay a lot more. I guess Apple is also an example where people are willing to pay a premium of iPhones because there's only one seller of iPhone, which is Apple. And firms are price takers. So when we have a monopoly, firms are price makers. They make the price. Consumers take the price. And in a perfectly competitive market, firms take whatever price is given by the consumer or the market. So they don't make the price, they take the price, which is a consequence of large numbers of buyers and sellers. The second characteristic is homogeneous products. So what do I mean by homogeneous products? They are all the same. Same product. In the apple, the price of banana. All the bananas basically looks the same, taste the same. So we can call them homogeneous. And so what is the a consequence of having homogeneous product. So because there's no differentiation, the only way to attract customers is by offer the lowest price possible. So this is also very important. I think one good example is I will use the platform Temu. If you go into the Temu website or application, you can see that the products, they are very, very cheap. And it's cheap for a reason, because they don't have any branding. So maybe if you want to buy a jacket, because there's no brand, and each jacket basically offers you the same level of comfort or utility, then what you are looking for is lower price. If this seller is selling for $20 and then that one seller is selling for $15, then you go to the seller that is selling for $15, because they are all essentially the same. But once you have branding, people are willing to pay a few $1,000s for a jacket. And in this case, we do not have homogeneous products. So it is not a perfectly competitive market. And that's why it is expensive, because there's market power when you do not have exactly the same product. So the third point, characteristic of the perfectly competitive market, is ease of exit, entry. So what is the consequence of ease of exit and entry? So when firms are able to come in and then leave this industry very easily, then no firms will make supernormal profit. So what do I mean by supernormal profit? Very, very strange name. So normally, firms make zero profit? No, not zero profit, zero economic profit. Remember, economic profit takes into account the opportunity cost. And accounting profit purely looks at what is the revenue and what is the cost, and the leftover is your profit. So why does firms make zero economic profit in the long run? Because precisely of the characteristic of perfect competition. So when you have any supernormal profit, for example, if you can earn $80,000 in your job, and then once you know this opportunity of making $90,000 in accounting profit by opening a shop, then you would have a $10,000 of supernormal profit. So you will go into this industry. And because you go into this industry, there is more competition. And gradually the accounting profit, should decrease to $80,000. So you are indifferent between switching from your day job and also from running your own shop. So that's why firms make zero economic profit. In the long run, people should be indifferent. There shouldn't be any incentive to leave or to join this industry, because there's no supernormal profit. And this condition is satisfied only if we have ease of exit and entry. Once it is very difficult to enter this industry, maybe it's the mining industry. If I want to open a mine in Western Australia, I need hundreds of millions of dollars. I also need to get government approval. So this is a very high barrier of entry. And I guess it's one of the reasons. So if you look at the crude oil market, the cost of producing a barrel of oil is around $10 maximum. But they are able to sell this oil for, I think currently it's around $70 per barrel. So that's a huge profit margin because of this difficulties of entry. Another example is the airplane. So the you think about Qantas, Virgin Australia, those are operating in the aviation sector. They are very difficult to leave this industry because of all the airplanes they have, the very expensive airplanes they have. And if they want to exit, they are going to lose basically all the value of their airplanes. So even if during COVID times they are losing billions and billions of dollars every year, they won't shut down because of this very high barrier of exit. Once you leave the industry, it's very difficult for you to come back in due to the very expensive fixed cost associated with the aviation sector. And then in these two examples, they are able to make supernormal profit or perhaps supernormal loss, depending on the circumstance. But if we can exit and enter the market easily, then no one would make supernormal profit and no one will make supernormal loss. So that's the three characteristics of the perfectly competitive market. And you should be able to write those down in your final exam. So now we have paved way. So all those things I mentioned before, they are assumptions. With those assumptions in mind, we can derive the law of supply, law of demand, which will be very useful in our economic analysis. This is not necessarily a true depiction of the reality, but it helps us to understand what is going on. Okay, so the major topic of study in this area of study, let's first look at law of demand. Of course, we also have law of supply. We will cover this later. So now we introduce a graph. So in the horizontal axis, we have quantity. Vertical axis, we have price. And the law of demand, by definition, so this is a definition. Higher price would result in lower quantity. Demanded. Lower price, higher quantity demanded. So this is the law of demand. You can also say that there is an inverse relationship between quantity demanded and price, to keep it a little bit shorter. So with this in mind, let's plot the demand curve. So we already know that when price is high, we have low quantity, so quantity is low. When price is low, we have high quantity. Okay, so should look something like this. negatively sloped curve. And changing in price, so move up and down the price, moves you along this unchanged demand curve. And this is what we call movement along the demand curve. We will also investigate about shift in demand curve later. Movement in demand. We have expansion and contraction. Expansion is quantity going up, or maybe converse, price goes down. Contraction, quantity goes down, price goes up. Only price change causes movement in demand. Nothing else. Price change causes movement in demand, either an expansion or a contraction. Anything else would shift the demand curve. So be very careful of this. Whenever you use the term movement, expansion, contraction, this is associated with change in price. So now let's look at factors that can shift the demand curve. So maybe we first try to understand what do I mean by shift in demand. So I will use Q to represent quantity, P to represent price. And this is the demand curve. When you have a positive shift, positive doesn't mean good or bad. It just means that there is more quantity demanded for any given price. So maybe for a price of $5, you can see that we have an increase in quantity demanded, even though the price is not changing. So this is what I mean by shift in demand. A change in the quantity demanded at a given price. Super important. If the price changes as well, then you have a very complicated dynamic. You have shifting demand as well as movement along the demand curve. Also, we can have negative shift. You can see clearly that even though the price is still at $5, you have less quantity demanded. Okay, so this is what the shift in demand looks like. But what causes the shift in demand? There are many causes that you need to be aware of. First one, disposable income. What is disposable income? Income after tax. Income tax. Okay, so how does disposable income shift the demand curve? Let's have a think. If you have more disposable income, if you are richer, then you can able to buy or are willing to buy more goods and services. So increase in disposable income means willing and able to buy goods, services. So maybe if you earn $200,000 a year, not only you are able to buy a lot of things, Maybe you want to buy a lot of things to show off your wealth, show off your high income. Maybe you buy expensive cars, you buy watches, buy this, buy that. And this action you choose to do would increase demand, regardless of the price of that particular goods. Maybe a car is $100,000 and suddenly you get a pay rise. Then even if the price is still $100,000, you are willing to buy it now because you have a higher disposable income. Okay, and then an increase in disposable income, as we discussed, is a positive shift in demand. So shift demand to the right. A decrease in disposable income, perhaps due to an increase in income tax, causes a negative shift in the demand curve. And this negative shift in the demand curve is corresponding to a decrease in quantity demanded at any given price. The second factor is interest rates. I think we are all very familiar with what is happening with interest rate over the past few years. The interest rate skyrocketed from 0.1%. I think now it's around 4.3%. A very huge increase in interest rate. And interest rate affects you and I through discretionary income. This is different from disposable income. So discretionary income is income after tax and after mortgage repayment. So this is what you are actually able to spend discretionary. So you need to pay off your mortgage before you can buy things you want, essentially. So this is the definition of discretionary income. And interest rate affects your mortgage repayment and therefore affects your discretionary income. And this is also closely linked with your willingness and ability to buy goods and services. Increase in interest rate decreases your discretionary income, which shifts demand to the left. So that's how you should answer those kind of questions in the exam. The third factor, taste and preference. So this is basically what people want at a particular point in time. So if suddenly people wants to buy, maybe it's summertime, wants to buy ice cream, then the demand of ice cream will shift to the right. Even though it's still at $5, but because it's hot outside, everyone would rush to buy ice creams. So the quantity demanded increased without a change in price. So in this instance, you shift the demand to the right. And also, I just heard yesterday at Woolworths, they're selling the peanut butter that is made in China. So many people are very worried about this. Not sure whether it is based on fact or just based on their preference. People are boycotting the peanut butter sold in Woolworths. So this would cause the demand to shift to the left, even though the price is still the same. So that's an example of change in preference. And perhaps for the Coles peanut butter, you would have a positive shift, because people are no longer buying the Woolworths brand peanut butter. So very interesting observation here. Okay, another important factor is the price of substitute. So these are goods and services with similar utilities. So provides basically similar functions. Butter and margarine, so the artificial human-made butter, they are substitutes. And if the price of natural butter increases, then the price, then everyone would shift to the artificial one. So in the market of human-made butter, we would actually see a shift in demand because the price of natural butter increases. So everyone would come to buy human-made butter instead. And then this, even though the price of human-made butter is unchanged, we still have a large quantity demanded. I guess another way to think about this problem is that when the price of natural butter increased, then relatively speaking, the price of margarine decreased. And consequently, we have a higher quantity demanded. So I guess the difficult thing for students to remember is that the shift in demand of one good is actually caused by change in price of another product. That is the substitute of the product you are investigating. So there's actually two different prices going on. And don't be confused about this. So it is the action of one market, the natural butter market, that actually changes the demand of another market, the margarine market. Be very careful about this. We also have price of complements. So coffee and milk. So they have different impacts. For example, if the price of coffee increased, if price of coffee increased, then maybe people will drink less coffee and consequently consume less milk. Drink less coffee, consume less milk. So this would represent a shift in milk demand to the left. So when you are drawing this kind of picture, you need to label what market you are talking about. Market for milk, quantity, price. Demand 0, demand 1. So at a given price, quantity 1, quantity 0 to quantity 1. You have less quantity demanded for milk. Not because of the problem with the milk market per se, but because the price of coffee has increased for whatever reason. So I guess the unifying thing between complements and substitute is that the change in price of one product leads to a shift in demand of another product. So those markets are interrelated. So the last two factors, the sixth factor is change in population. So when population have increased, we would expect to see an increase in demand for goods and services. Naturally, because everyone needs to consume in order to survive. And this would shift demand to the right, which means higher quantity demanded at any given price. You can say this is market for whatever thing you want. In general, you should see those kind of shift when population have increased. The last factor, changes in consumer confidence. This is closely related to a concept called marginal propensity to consume. Use this term in your exam to show off your understanding in economics. So the marginal propensity to consume is supposed to have $1 increase in your income. How much of this additional income will you spend? Well, if you spend 0.8, then you have a high marginal propensity to consume. If you spend 0.01, you have a low marginal propensity to consume. And when consumer confidence increases, when you are more confident about the economic state of the economy, you are willing to spend more money. You don't need to worry about being unemployed, this and that. So you are more free to spend your income. So the marginal propensity to consume. So marginal propensity to consume tend to increase with increase in consumer confidence. So a change in consumer confidence magically is like an increase in disposable income. Even though the income is not changing, but you are spending more. So the effect is positive with a higher consumer confidence. Increasing consumer confidence means you are more willing to spend money and thus increase the demand of goods and services at any particular price. So an increase in quantity demanded with a high consumer confidence. Okay. So that's the 7 factors you need to know about the demand curve. I mean the shift in demand curve. So how do you explain the dynamics of shift in demand curve? Well, we will discuss this in later sections because we need to introduce another thing in order to understand the market fully, which is supply. Knowing demand alone is not sufficient. You need to know the supply in order to have a complete understanding of the market you are investigating. So law of supply, a positive relationship between price and quantity. Graphically, looks something like this. A higher price corresponds to higher quantity supplied. This also makes sense because a higher price means higher profit to be made, so you are willing to supply more. So this is the law of supply. And just like law of demand, as we have emphasized before, movement along the supply curve is only caused by change in price. Nothing else. When you talk about movement, it is change in price. Because we have movement, we also have shift. So let's look at the shifting in supply. All the supply factors. In the exam, they will often ask you to outline 2 supply factors. Whenever you see the term supply factors, always think about shift in demand curve and always link back to what I will mention now, which is some of the supply factors you need to know. It is actually less to remember for supply than for demand. So the first one, cost of production. When I was doing the exam, I would write COP. So how does cost of production affect supply? Well, if you have a lower cost of production, what does this mean? For a given price, you have more profit. Because you have more profit, more willing and able to supply. More willing to supply because you earn a higher profit. More able to supply because you are earning a higher profit. So those 2 things usually go together. So shift supply out at any price level. Graphically, market for whatever thing you are talking about. So for a given price, you have a higher quantity. This is a shift, positive shift in the demand supply curve. The second factor, productivity. I think it was in the 2012 VCE exam. They ask you the difference between productivity and production. Production is the process of converting raw material to final product. Productivity is how well you can do those conversion. How much raw material you need to convert to your final product. If you need relatively less raw material and produce relatively more final product, you are productive, and vice versa. Don't get confused between those two terms. In here, we are talking about productivity, not production. Okay. So higher productivity means lower average cost of production. And now you should be very happy because this is cost of production. It's essentially the same as this factor. You can say, oh, more productivity, lower average production cost, more willing, more able to supply, shift supply out, Exactly the same thing. Okay, so that's easy. You only need to remember one, basically. The third factor, technological change. Okay, ChatGPT maybe dramatically increased your productivity. Back in the day, you need to write an essay, maybe 2 or 3 hours. Nowadays, 2 minutes. So a huge increase in productivity. And this is linked to productivity. Oh, very good, because we already mentioned productivity before. Productivity is linked to cost of production. Oh, very good. We also know cost of production. So, yeah. So you only need to remember one. That's very good. Much nicer than the demand factors. The fourth factor. Unfortunately, you need to remember this one. Climate conditions. I think that's an easy one to remember. Just think about your food. Everyone likes food. So, it's not hard to remember. So when the climate is good, you have more. I mean, this is really applied to agriculture products. More fruit produced. Shift supply. And then the graph is basically the same as this one. You can argue the converse as well. If climate is bad, less fruit produced, shift supply to the left. So that's the supply factors you need to remember. Okay. Now the interesting things happened. What if we combine the supply and demand curve together? This will be very interesting. This is the supply. This is demand. And now you see an intersection. Whenever you see an intersection, this means something is going on. So this is called equilibrium, as you already learned in year 11 economics. Why is this equilibrium? Because at equilibrium, supply equals to demand exactly. So market is cleared. And that's why it is called equilibrium. There's no tendency for market to move. So let's look at how does shift in demand and shift in supply affects the market. So this is actually the market because we have supply and demand, and we can actually know what is the actual price in the market, what is the actual quantity in the market. Let's look at demand first. So the first factor, increase in interest rate. As you recall from the previous section, increasing interest rate decreases discretionary income. Which means less willing and able to purchase goods and services, which means shift demand to the left. So what do we see here? A decrease in quantity, decrease in price. So how do we explain this dynamic? Let's look at this step by step very carefully. When the demand curve shifts to the left, at original price, maybe let's decompose this a little bit. At original price, so let's look at what is going on at the original price. So at original price, this is your quantity demanded. This is your quantity supplied. Quantity supplied larger than quantity demanded. We have a problem. This is a surplus. We have a surplus at original price. So firms would see an increase in their inventories. They are not selling any stuff. So firms are very worried. What do? Firms lower price. So firms, they lower the price. And when price is lower, what would happen? You have a expansion along the demand curve. This is the law of demand. Also, you have a contraction along the supply curve. This is the law of supply. So you can also see here when price is lower, they kind of converge to this new equilibrium. So this process would continue until quantity demanded equal to quantity supplied exactly at a given price at P1. And this is the new equilibrium. And in this new equilibrium, we can see graphically, we have a lower price and lower quantity transacted. So this is the dynamic of adjustment. And I guess for the shift in supply, it's the same story. Maybe we do a one more example about shifting supply. In this case, maybe we use an example where the price have actually increased. So adverse supply, lower productivity. Remember what I talked about the deal before? Lower productivity, less willing, less able to supply, less quantity. Shift supply to the left at any given price. So you need to mention those in your exam. Okay. Originally, at the original price, this is demand, and this is supply. We have a shortage. And you can argue this both ways. So a shortage consumer bid up price. Or producer see shortage to pass on the cost to consumers. Both works, but the ultimate effect is that relative price increased. So this is step 2. Relative price have increased. Then, same process as before. Because of higher price, expansion in supply, contraction in demand. Because in this case, the price is changing. Okay, so why does supply increase? Precisely because higher price means supernormal profit. Supernormal profit because of ease of entry. Other firms join this industry. Because other firms enter this industry, we have a higher supply. So this links closely back to our assumptions of a perfectly competitive market. And now as price have increased. Expansion in supply, contraction in demand. Why do we have contraction in demand? We have income effect. People are simply less able to afford this particular goods or services. We have substitution effect. People simply switch to a substitute. So this links back to our factors of demand. So precisely because of this price increase, we would expect to see a shift in demand curve in other markets that is related to these goods or services. So that's how when everything comes together, you can see the interconnection between those kind of things. And eventually, this means we are at equilibrium. Quantity demanded equal to quantity supplied. And in this case, quantity overall have decreased, price overall have increased. So until we get to a price where so this is how you answer those kind of more complicated questions, the dynamic of adjustment. So that's it for this video. I will cover further topics in area of study 1 in the subsequent video.